Chapter 20. Whether fortresses and many of the other present-day expedients, to which princes have recourse, are useful or not. To keep a secure hold on their states, some princes have disarmed their subjects. Some have kept the town subject to them divided. Some have purposely fostered animosity against themselves. Some have endeavored to win over those who were initially suspect. Some have put up fortresses. Some have razed them to the ground. It is impossible to give a final verdict on any of these policies unless one examines the particular circumstances of the states in which such decisions have had to be taken. Nonetheless, I shall as far as possible discuss the matter in generalizations. Now, no new prince has ever, at any time, disarmed his subjects. Rather, when he has found them unarmed, he has always given them arms. This is because by arming your subjects you arm yourself. Those who were suspect become loyal, and those who were loyal not only remain so, but are changed from being merely your subjects to being your partisans. Then, as it is impossible to arm everybody, when you have given this privilege to some, you can deal more severely with the others. And this discrimination will, when it is understood, put the former under more of an obligation. The others will excuse you, judging that it is necessary for those who run more risks and incur greater obligations to be treated more favorably. But as soon as you disarm your subjects, you start to offend them, showing whether through cowardice or suspicion that you mistrust them. And on either score, hatred is aroused against you. Then, since you cannot stay unarmed, you are forced to have recourse to mercenary troops, whose character is as I described above. And even if these mercenaries were reliable, they could not be sufficiently so to protect you against powerful enemies, and against subjects you distrust. So as I said, a new prince in a new principality always arms his subjects, and history is full of examples of this. But when a prince acquires a state which is annexed to his original principality, like a new limb, then he must disarm his new subjects, except for those who were his partisans. Even they, as time and opportunity allow, must be made weak and effeminate, and matters must be so arranged that throughout your dominions only your own soldiers, serving near you in your original dominion, are armed. Our ancestors, and those who were considered to be wise, were accustomed to say that it was necessary to control Pistoia by means of factions, and Pisa by means of fortresses. So they fostered strife in various of their subject towns, so as to control them more easily. In those days, when there was a stability of a sort in Italy, this was doubtless sensible. But I do not think it makes a good rule today. I do not believe that any good at all ever comes of dissension. On the contrary, on the approach of the enemy, cities which are so divided inevitably succumb at once. The weaker faction will always go over to the invader, and the other will not be able to hold out. The Venetians, influenced, I believe, by the considerations I gave above, fostered the Guelph and Ghibelline factions in their subject cities. Although they never allowed bloodshed, yet they fostered these discords so that the citizens, taken up with their own dissensions, might never combine against them. But, as we have seen, this did not turn out as they had planned, because when the Venetians were routed at Vela, one faction immediately summoned up courage and took the whole state from them. Such methods therefore argue for weakness on the part of the prince. In a strong principality, such dissensions are never allowed. They profit the prince only in times of peace, when he can make use of them to handle his subjects more easily. But when war comes, the weakness of this policy is revealed. There is no doubt that a prince's greatness depends on his triumphing over difficulties and opposition. So fortune, especially when she wants to build up the greatness of a new prince, whose need to acquire standing is more pressing than that of a hereditary ruler, finds enemies for him and encourages them to take the field against him, so that he may have cause to triumph over them and ascend higher on the ladder than his foes have provided. Many, therefore, believe that when he has the chance, an able prince should cunningly foster some opposition to himself, so that by overcoming it he can enhance his own stature. Princes, especially new ones, have found men who were suspect at the start of their rule more loyal and more useful than those who at the start were their trusted friends. Pandolfo Pantrochi, ruler of Siena, governed his state more with the support of those who had been suspect than with that of the others. But here generalization is impossible, because circumstances vary. I shall say just this: a prince will never have any difficulty in winning over those who were initially his enemies, when they are such that they need someone to lean upon. And they are all the more forced to serve him loyally, inasmuch as they realize that it is more necessary for them to wipe out with their actions the bad opinion he had formed of them. And so the prince finds them more useful than those who feel themselves so secure in his service that they neglect his interests. Since it is relevant to the subject, I shall remind princes who have recently seized a state for themselves, through support given them from within, that they should carefully reflect on the motives of those who helped them. If these were not based on a natural affection for the new prince, but rather on discontent with the existing government, he will retain their friendship only with considerable difficulty and exertion, because it will be impossible for him in his turn to satisfy them. If we carefully examine the reasons for this, with examples taken from ancient and modern times, it will be found that a prince far more easily wins the friendship of those who were formerly satisfied with the existing government, and so were hostile to him then, than of those who, because they were dissatisfied, became his friends and favored his occupation. Princes, in order to hold their dominions more securely, have been accustomed to build fortresses, which act as a curb on those who may plot rebellion against them, and which provide a safe refuge from sudden attack. I approve of this policy because it has been used from the time of the ancient world. Nonetheless, in our own time, Messer Niccolo Vitelli saw fit to raise 2 fortresses in Città di Castello in order to maintain his hold there. Guidobaldo, Duke of Urbino, after he returned to the dominion from which Caesar Borgia had chased him, razed to the ground all the fortresses in his province, in the belief that by doing so it would be more difficult for him to lose the state again. When they returned to Bologna, the Bentivoglio followed a similar policy. So we see that fortresses are useful or not, depending on circumstances, and if they are beneficial in one direction, they are harmful in another. It can be put like this: the prince who is more afraid of his own people than of foreign interference should build fortresses, but the prince who fears foreign interference more than his own people should forget about them. The castle of Milan, built by Francesco Forza, has caused and will cause more uprisings against the house of Forza than any other source of disturbance. So the best fortress that exists is to avoid being hated by the people. If you have fortresses and yet the people hate you, they will not save you. Once the people have taken up arms, they will never lack outside help. In our own time, there is no instance of a fortress proving its worth to any ruler, except in the case of the Countess of Forli, after her consort, Count Girolamo, had been killed. In her case, the fortress gave her a refuge against the assault of the populace, where she could wait for succor from Milan, and then recover the state. Circumstances were such that the people could not obtain support from outside, but subsequently fortresses proved of little worth even to her, when Caesar Borgia attacked her, and then her hostile subjects joined forces with the invader. So then, as before, it would have been safer for her to have avoided the enmity of the people than to have fortresses. So all things considered, I commend those who erect fortresses and those who do not, and I censure anyone who, putting his trust in fortresses, does not mind if he is hated by the people.